I was having a conversation with Ellie the other day where I told them that aside from the Kaworu piece, where I drew units 1 and 2, all my Evangelion art is actually deceptively simple and not as much work as it looks. And why is that? I think my colors and contrast do all the heavy lifting. So in this series of videos, I want to break down my Asuka, Shinji, and Rei pieces to show you how they don't really require much knowledge of things like perspective, and how things like scale, colors, and contrast can make a background just as effective as a strong grasp in these things. Today we're focusing on the Asuka piece. The Asuka piece is technically the trickiest out of the three because there is a bit of perspective when it comes to fitting her in the chair, as well as the amount of detail in the tech. But beyond that, there isn't much else. So let's start with the color breakdown. This is a very rough and sort of rudimentary breakdown of the colors to simplify the image. You can see that the color scheme here relies on the complementary scheme. We can see on the color wheel that this image uses almost exclusively shades within the blue and blue-green range, and a variety of warm tones from red to orange and even to yellow-orange. Because these colors are across from each other, they're called complementary. Because complementary colors tend to sort of vibrate when laid on top of each other at the same chroma, like a bright orange on a bright blue, muting a color, making it less saturated, or making a color darker or lighter can help the colors harmonize more, while still retaining a nice contrast that can help make the subject pop. We can also move the colors slightly on the value spectrum to reduce vibration. In this case, the blues around Asuka are a little more on the green side than a straight up pure blue, while the blue around the pink rays is closer to purple. This makes all the colors harmonize better, while still providing enough contrast to make Asuka and the rays stand out. With that, let's talk about contrast. As you can see, the majority of the piece lives in the mid-tone range, while the contrast focuses exclusively on our subject and on the lines leading to that subject. It was important to keep the colors of the seat muted and as close to the background shade of blue as possible in order to keep them from drawing the eye away from where I wanted it to go. You'll notice that the colors do get visibly darker behind Asuka, and places where the light rays might hit I decided not to shade. This is because the effect needs to be exclusively on her, and doesn't really have to be true to life because this piece is about inner psychological turmoil and not about what's going on around her. It would have been distracting to have the light shining in places that I don't really need the viewer to look at or that would add to the viewer's understanding. The colors being darker around Asuka also help increase our perception of how bright she and the rays are, and to serve as sort of a cradle to increase the contrast and make her pop even more. Now let's take a look at the lines. I've talked before about implied and actual lines. This piece mainly relies on actual lines since we have literal lines pointing to our subject. The black lines from the windows around her help to reinforce the rays from the other corners of the frame. As for the overall composition, looking at it a few months after drawing, I do think it crops a bit weird since Asuka's feet get cut off by the frame, but overall I don't think it's a crime. Asuka takes up about half of the frame, both vertically, but also her and her seat as one take up half of the frame diagonally. There's a lot more going on Asuka's half of the frame, which will immediately draw our eyes to that side, and the top half is left mostly empty, save for the rays that end up leading us back to Asuka. A diagonal splitting of the canvas can help us split the frame in a more interesting way than simply vertically or horizontally. And when we use the contrast of detailed versus simple, we are able to draw the eye where we want it to go more easily. To show you guys I'm not full of shit, I wanted to try and replicate most of these principles again in a quick drawing. So I whipped up this quick thing, which according to Procreate didn't take more than 20 minutes. I've got the cooler blue behind Garfield and the warmer blue behind the window this time, but the difference in values and saturation is what keeps them from clashing. The darker floor and the dark accessories help keep the piece grounded and help to add contrast from Garfield and the window. So that's really all I have to say when it comes to this piece. It's a bit hard to talk about it sometimes because after you do it consciously long enough, it becomes something you don't really think about anymore and you just into it. So it is a bit hard to try and go back and analyze your own work and see what principles you were subconsciously applying. But the same thing is gonna happen with you guys as you go in and consciously apply the principles. Eventually, from all the practice that you get, you won't really have to think about it anymore. That being said, if you have any questions, please let me know and I'll do my best to help you out. Bye-bye!